Section 6 of the Daredevil of the Army. Experiences as a buzzer and dispatch rider by Austin Patrick Corcoran. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3, in which the telephone proves its utility and instability. Part 2. Well, it is September the 24th, and our preparations are complete. All the cables have been laid, all the men have been notified of the positions they are to occupy tomorrow. The particular sector whose communications are in our hands lies facing the famous quarries north of Hullock. God grant we may be occupying them by next sundown. The infantryman is equally ready for his task. In my travels along the trenches, superintending my own men, I have caught glimpses of the efforts he is making. Here is a party filling piles of sandbags, there another serving out ammunition and bombs, a third is concealing the long iron gas cylinders. We have adopted the Hun tactics at last. It is a difficult but all important matter to get these cylinders in a safe place. Should a shell hit them, we would be hoist with our own petard. Finally, it is decided to bury them under the firing step, the most convenient and best protected spot in the trench. At 7:30 tomorrow morning the loose ball will begin. The band has already begun to play. For the past month the artillery has been tuning up. Over the 7-mile front on which our advance is to be made, 1,300 guns have been pounding out their promise, sending intermittent samples of the music we may expect at the rate of 300 rounds per gun. Now the intervals are growing shorter between items. The rounds have increased to 500. They are rending the very sky with their screams. Meantime, of course, Fritz has not been backward. He is preparing a little pleasantry of his own. Whizz! Bang! The little hill behind our house has suddenly been transformed into a hollow. Pip! Squeak! A neighbour's hut is levelled, and in its place yawns a crater containing hut and inhabitants. Madame, the stolid, is already poorer by the loss of a barn, and our men are looking for other billets. Scully, my batman, robbed of his home, decides to share the one he has procured for me. Like the gentleman in the scriptures, he takes up his bed and walks. Now his straw is lying in a corner on my nice, clean cobbled floor. But he's comfortable. Little accidents don't disturb him. For to-night he will have the outhouse practically to himself. I've decided to spend the evening with some friends in a neighbouring village. As there is prospect of some fun, I give him the tip that I may not be home before morning. He receives the news without any perceptible trace of sorrow. Poor chap! He's to regret it before long. Day has not yet dawned when I start on my return journey. I feel I should like a little sleep before the scrap. A sudden silence has sprung up all along the line, and I speed up to take advantage of this unaccustomed lull. But I have not yet reached home when the storm again breaks loose. The reason, of course, is obvious. All along the roads men are tramping to the trenches to relieve those others who have been working for the past 10 days. Fritz, naturally, is trying to thin their ranks. Crump, crump, crump. So it goes all round. The day is breaking, and in the distance I see my billet. As I look, I see smoke. Lord, have they hit the house? I enter the yard, and the grey light reveals a heap of stones on the left. My room. I go nearer to investigate the damage. Evidently the shell had hit the ground just outside, causing the wall on one side to collapse. The corner where my bed stood has crumpled in. In the other, Scully's straw is lying undisturbed. I look round, wondering where he can be, and presently discover him amid the ruins. Poor chap, he had taken advantage of my tip to crawl into my more comfortable quarters. He has paid for the small pleasure with his life. But suppose I had been careful and stayed at home for the sake of my sleep? Well, evidently in this case the gods are rewarding the prodigal. Let us hope they will be equally kind on the morrow. Collins takes me in for the few hours remaining. By 5 I am out again to report to the Signal Office, where I am detailed to look after the wiring of a sector of trenches between 2 points north of Vermelles. Already the activity of the artillery is so violent that the sky overhead resembles a sheet of steel. So thick and fast do the shells come that they seem a solid grey mass. Our ears are buzzing with the whir of their flight. Round us, too, explosions are sending up their spray of smoke. Our eyes begin to ache and our tongues have an acrid taste. Can a man preserve his mind amid such confusion of the senses? I get my answer on entering the next traverse. This is the scene that meets my gaze. On the firing step an altar has been erected. At it stands a Catholic priest. He is just finishing the morning mass. Round him on their knees are grouped a body of Irishmen, caps in hand, their bent heads betraying the reverence in their hearts. By no sign, not even a side glance at the havoc all round, do they show any interest in the peril of their position. Some faces are grim, all are grave, but not one shows a trace of nervousness, much less of terror. For the moment they seem to be lifted by some superhuman force above the physical horror of their surroundings. And these are the same men who, a little later in the fight, are to quail before the torrent of the terrible liquid fire. Big, brawny and brave, they hesitated for a few seconds on the sight of this new instrument of torture, then out rushed their commanding officer, waving their own flag. "Up Irish and at 'em!" he roared above the guns. And with their war cry on their lips, they answered the challenge. "Fauga Balak!" they shouted as they leapt forward to the attack, and though they fell like saplings under the sweep of a forest fire, the Germans had to yield before their fury. Wild beasts was the name a Boche prisoner applied to them later, but there is no evidence of ferocity in them now. The mass over, they rise from their knees, shake themselves with a sigh, straighten up, and stroll off to their positions. Magnificent men, morally and physically, they can ill be spared by their small country, but of such war is reaping a heavy harvest. It is 7:20. In 10 minutes our artillery will lift the curtain and our men will go over the top. I am standing in a trench, directing some wiring, and incidentally watching the men who will make the fight. Territorials these, amateurs at the game. It is their first dip in the baptism of blood. It is curious to see how the different types react to the trial. There is Charlie, who before the war was somebody's indifferent clerk with somewhat more energy than ability. When the first wave of patriotism struck his country, Charlie was on the top crest of the billow, bellowing with all his little might. An excitable gentleman, he is finding it hard to control his nerves. Now he sits on the firing step, grinning inanely. Now he walks up and down, cursing in a low tone. Presently a voice interrupts his soliloquy. "Give us a match," says Bill, and the hand that takes it is steady. Bill is the calm cuss who enlisted as a matter of course, without enthusiasm, with no evidence of any ardour. Now he is smoking his pipe, but I notice that his eye wanders, and always in the same direction, with an expression of anxiety and some sympathy. I follow his glance, and mine falls on Jim. He is sitting on the ground, white-faced but quiet. His sensitive features are positively twisted with terror, and between his lips hangs a cigarette that has been lit but is now dead. "Have a light," Bill says to him presently, and a mechanical smile lights up the fine face. Jim is one of those imaginative, highly strung lads who joined up from a sheer sense of duty, and who is seeing the thing through in a positive agony of fear. "Up with you, boys," comes the order at last. A quiver seems to run through the traverse, and instantly all the men are on their feet. Charlie makes for the firing step with the uncertain gait of a blind man. Bill's walk is slow and deliberate. For a moment Jim holds back. Will the boy funk at the last lap? I can see the officer eyeing him, and again there is sympathy in the glance. But again his soul nerves him, though his heart fails. With a sudden rush, as if possessed by some demon of determination, the boy makes for the firing step. Up he climbs, over the top, and is out ahead of the rest, the bravest man of the whole bunch. Soon we are advancing at a rate which even the most optimistic would not have dared to hope for this morning. Trench after trench is taken by our men. We signallers are extending our lines forward, but the task becomes more difficult every moment. Shells, machine guns, even rifle fire are thinning our ranks, and at the same time cutting our cables. To keep the established communications intact, and at the same time lay new lines, would require double our usual complement of workers. We are already reduced to half. But that is not our only problem. Elaborate systems of communication trenches had been dug to facilitate all movements of troops. Signboards stuck up all along the line gave direction in extreme detail. "This way out," "This way in," "For the wounded." They were all over the place, but no attention is being paid to them now. Every traverse is packed tight with the proverbial closeness of the sardine can. God, how the casualties are pouring in tens, twenties, fifties, hundreds. They lie on the ground, they line the walls. Sometimes so great is the congestion that new batches have to be borne out in the open, where an enemy shell occasionally mercifully puts them past their pain, or adds to it, as the case may be. And then the new men, the reinforcements, on whom our hope depends to consolidate positions already won. They must be let through at all costs, and with the least possible exposure to danger. Meantime, in these very trenches, our wires are being cut. How to get at them and do the necessary repairing? Here and there a man manages to crawl through, but it takes so long, and we are already so handicapped. Out of 26 workers, I have 4 left now. Request after request goes back for reinforcements. Finally they send me out 12, but already complaints are coming in. "See here, Mr. Signaller," one colonel says to me, "what the hell is the matter with our line? We can't distinguish a word that's being said. Better see to it, the telephone has gone groggy." I look over it. D3. It seems OK to me, but probably the line has been earthed somewhere. I send a lineman out to look for the cause of the trouble, and this is what he finds. I give the story as he gave it to me. "Well, sir, I goes along the line and testin' every 200 yards, and all of a sudden like I see a sight that makes me sick in my insides. Right there in front of me is sure enough Harry. Clearly, leastways, sir, all that was left of him. He had his left leg blown clean off, sir, and half the other, and one bloomin' hand off, and Gord blimey, sir, if he didn't have the broken ends of the cable held fast in his other hand, and he stone dead, sir. Well, sir, I mends the cable and then looks about me, and I sees a long trail of blood about 20 yards. Poor Harry, sir, he must have been busted by a shell, and then he crawled back, I suppose, sir, with his half a leg and half an arm, and gripped the wire, sir, and died." There seems to be tears in Hawkins' voice as he tells the story. For a few moments he stops, looking at me indecisively, as if debating whether he shall proceed. Then he lowers his tone to a confidential pitch as he goes on. "You see, sir, me and Harry was the best of pals. Sort of engaged to his sister Lucy, I was, sir. God Almighty!" Of a sudden his pity gives way to fury, and a string of oaths and curses rain from his mouth. "I'll make those bleedin' swine pay for this, I will. You see if I don't." He has almost forgotten my presence. Then the rage subsides and he sidles off, as if half ashamed. Poor fellow, he gets small chance to wreak the revenge he threatened. A piece of high explosive gets him a few hours later, and so I lose 2 of my most valuable men. At last we have reached the quarries that lie between Hullo and the Hohenzollern redoubt, but it is a thin, tired line that now advances bravely on these formidable enemy defences, and yet a line on which our whole success depends. In the comparative security of the hollow behind these clay hills, the Boche has had time to steady himself. Now heavily reinforced, he has rallied and is ready for the little troop that is so doggedly pressing on. But why is the troop so little? What has become of the reserves that had been promised earlier from the 21st and 24th Divisions? Surely to heaven they won't fail us at a crisis like this, when we had trusted to them for new strength in the terrible struggle. On moves the line, and is met by the machine guns. It sways, steadies itself, sways again, falls back. Thicker and thicker comes the rain of bullets, pressing the advantage for the Boche. Again the line gives way. It is no more than a mere trickle now. Great God! Won't those reserves ever come up? Then a horrible thing happens to that tiny troop. It finds itself blocked from the rear. Barbed wire, their own barbed wire which the engineers, sure of success, had moved too far up behind them. They attack it, try to tear it down, get entangled in their own efforts. A fine target for those terrible guns. And still no sign of the reserves coming to the rescue. What has happened? Who has blundered? Someone hints that the fault lies in the weakness of the cable communications. The hurried calls, they say, were delayed. The messages hadn't got through properly. I go hot and cold all over as I listen. Surely to God they are telling lies. We couldn't have failed in spite of our efforts. They were desperate enough in all truth, and made against terrible odds. Well, if it is our fault, there is no use grumbling now. We can only stick to our posts and put our trust in the Scotchmen. There they are out in front, putting up a desperate resistance, the London Scottish, 1st Territorial Regiment in the British Army, to make a charge. No one will dare to laugh at the Terriers after this. Time after time they rush at the oncoming Germans. Ladies from hell is the pretty compliment they earn from their enemy, in whose souls they are inspiring real terror. Here is the evidence of it close at hand. 400 Boche prisoners sent to the rear after surrendering to 1 Kiltie and 3 Royal Army Medical Corps men. They are trembling, poor chaps, and their faces are yellow with lyddite. So it goes for days, attack and counter-attack, trenches won and lost, now through gas, now through liquid fire. The expected reserves come at last, but too late. We had lost our great advantage. We had hampered the great advance. In one other part of the line an equal failure is reported, but it fails to afford us any consolation. Then, on October the 8th, the terrible battle is over. Comparative quiet reigns along the line. We proceed to a counting of our casualties. 60,000 in 2 weeks. There was never a war like this war. But the Germans are even worse off than we. 80%, something over 100,000 men. Well, I can rival them in my small way. Out of a unit of 50, I have lost 40 men, and every one of them killed. Well, as I have said, we are now enjoying a comparative calm, and I am now on another part of the line. In the fighting to the south round Loos and facing Hill 70, we have lost a Brigade Signal Officer, and I am detailed to his post. I find the office in a disused house to the east of the village, about 1.5 miles away from the famous hill. Again there is a deadlock along the front, and I proceed to get my section into working order. There is plenty to be done these days in the way of repairing. Occasionally Fritz disturbs us at the job. He sends over a shell by way of reminder that he is not yet hors de combat, and at times succeeds in putting us in that condition. About a week after I had taken on my new job, I was sitting at my desk in the Signal Office, a much more elaborate affair than the farmhouse kitchen in which I found myself at the start. This is a large, long room. At one end and along one side is a bench to which telegraph and buzzer instruments are attached. At these sit the operators working. On the other side is a switchboard, with its attendant. In the centre, at a desk, to be accurate a large box, sits the sergeant, supervisor of the slaves. Behind him at another desk, an inferior box, are two corporals, one acting as despatch clerk and the other as checking clerk, whose duty it is to keep tabs on all messages, whether incoming or outgoing. Well, on the day when Fritz decided to get busy, we were all at our posts, more's the pity. For some time the artillery had been exchanging compliments, but to these we paid no attention. It was a habit of theirs, and had never yet disturbed us. However, one never knows along the line. This time, it seems, our turn had come. Straight through the roof, with a horrible crash, tore a shell, splitting the house in half. For a moment the noise stunned me, and I was thrown out of my chair right on top of the orderly who was sharing my corner. Then I stood up and looked round, to find myself al fresco. It was one of the strangest freak shots that I have ever seen. Gone were all the instruments with their operators. Gone, too, were the sergeant and the two corporals. And here were the orderly and myself, standing safely in the shaky remnant of the room. These, I might add, are the little accidents that shake a man's nerve. At times, however, they serve to strengthen a man's belief in his luck, give him the impression that he is somehow immune. But let me tell you another story that came to my notice next day, and gave me pause in my rejoicing over my escape. There was a widow in the north of England who had 5 sons before the war. One was a regular soldier. He went to France in August 1914. His brothers, civilians before, now joined Kitchener's army and went out with the first 100,000. Now Bill, as we call the regular, I've heard but forgotten his name, was in every scrap going from the start. He fought at Mons, on the Marne, at the Aisne, Neuve Chapelle, and just now he had come safely through at Loos. The other 4 had not lasted more than a few days on the line. They were killed, one after the other. Now the War Office, though a machine, betrays human feeling at times. On this occasion it was moved by the tale of the 5 brothers and the mother they had left alone in the north of England. So the order, after much red tape, went forth to the front to release Bill and send him home to a profitable job at munition making, where he could help his country and his mother in comparative immunity from death. So Bill, who had just survived the slaughter at Loos, packed his kit without regrets, shook hands with his friends, and mounted the motor lorry that was to take him to the station. You might think that the immortals had no use for Bill, having let him live so long in the midst of death. But Mars, it seems, must have his little joke. He was in sight of the station, and of safety, one would say, when over came a shell, picked the motor lorry for a target, and up it went, carrying Bill to kingdom come. It was a sour-faced sergeant who told me the tale. It was most effective in shaking my belief in my own immunity. I presume that was his object in telling it. As your American cartoonist says, Someone is always taking the joy out of life. Here we are again, going up in the world all the time. Now myself and my orderly, with our new instruments and our new operators, are installed in no meaner quarters than a chateau. They've given us the dining room. I believe my maps are spread on the very table at which fair ladies of France once sat and sipped champagne. Sic transit, says the poet. The glory of goblets is replaced by charts. Still, they are helping to save the ladies' country. Nothing exciting so far, save Fritz's morning frolics. The blighter is always disturbing our best sleep. Never mind, we've upset one of his apple carts to day. He is not quite as efficient as he thinks he is, at least when it comes to learning our language. Apt to be too accurate, which is a mistake. Only today, Sergeant Major Bradley of our signal section was strolling through one of the village streets. As he passed, he noticed a man near the top of one of those odd-looking towers which in France take the place of the telephone poles used in this country. Now, the Sergeant Major happens to be in charge of our linemen. He knows every one of them not only by sight, but by name. Moreover, he has an accurate memory for the duties he has told them to do. He failed to remember, however, that any man had been assigned to that tower. Then what the devil was he doing up there, testing the wires? This, at a casual glance, seemed to be the gentleman's occupation. The Sergeant Major who had passed decided to retrace his steps and investigate. With certain omissions which you can supply for yourself, he shouted to the figure on high, "What are you doing there? Who are you anyway?" "I'm a Royal Engineer," came the answer. Now, as it happens, no seasoned member of our corps ever refers to himself by such a title. He might call himself an R.E., though that is unusual. He prefers either sapper or lineman. "Oh, indeed," said the sergeant, becoming facetious. "Royal Engineer, are ye? Well, suppose ye come down and let's have a look at ye." The man prepared to descend. There was nothing else to do, but as he complied with the request, he slipped something in his pocket, which did not fail to catch the wary sergeant's eye. "So you're a Royal Engineer," he reiterated, when the gentleman had reached the ground. "And what might this be?" Putting his hand in the man's pocket, he drew out a neat leather case. It was a most compact instrument for tapping the wires. That man was in his grave before 2 hours, and the sergeant is likely to wear a decoration. End of section 6.